I'm now about to introduce a gentleman who was a pioneer of land-based pirate radio, as I mentioned this morning, probably preempting things a little bit, set the model for many of us to follow, and I think has been vindicated in terms of what he set out to do has been largely achieved. May I introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Knight, otherwise known as Nick Catford of Radio Jackie.
Good afternoon. I'm going to tell you something a little more light-hearted than we've heard earlier today. The story of the early years of Radio Jackie, how we actually got going. Or we could call it my love affair with the 807 valve. And if you've seen the transmitter sitting on the table there, you'll see one of those 807 valves that we used in many of our transmitters. That's what they look like. Or of course it could be my hatred of Eric Arthur Gotts, and some of you may have seen my badge, which I'm still proud to wear. I hate Eric. I was sorry to hear that he died last year at 92, but he had a good life, and he wasn't a nice man. There's a typical view of Eric Arthur Gotts. He was never happier than when confiscating someone's transmitter. He is directly responsible in 1973 for me being sent to prison. I believe the first pirate to have been sent to prison for broadcasting. I got my own back a few years later when I masterminded a court case. We prosecuted Mr. Gotts for assault, and the person who actually put his name to the prosecution is here today, and I think he was very brave to do so. Gotts was found guilty, and he appealed, and he lost his appeal, and as a direct result of that, we certainly didn't get raided for 5 years. He was always trying to chase me. This wasn't at a broadcast. This was at a court case. I was just taking photographs, and he just came straight after me. Nasty piece of work. Right, so back to the early days of Radio Jackie and how we came to set up. In the 1960s, I loved the Pirates. I listened to the Pirates, Radio London, Radio City, Swinging Radio England and Britain Radio. Now I put this one on because my dad, who was quite involved without knowing it in Radio Jackie, was a law-abiding person. He didn't approve of any law breaking, but of course he listened to Britain Radio and Radio 390, and I pointed out, Dad, they're illegal stations. Just because they're playing the sort of music you want to hear, he was still listening to them. And it turned out that he was actually in fully support of what we were doing. And of course Radio Caroline, I listened to all those stations, but they all, with the exception of Caroline, were forced off the air by the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act of 1967. Now 1967 saw a number of rallies in London, in Trafalgar Square and at Speaker's Corner, and I attended because I'd taken very much of a liking to pirate radio. So I attended as many of these rallies as I could. This was the Young Conservatives rally, and that was followed by a petition to 10 Downing Street. Also in 1968, saw the Free Radio Association being formed. They were formed actually in February 67 before the Marine Offences Act, and the National Commercial Radio Movement was formed in July 1968. They both organised rallies in Trafalgar Square and Speaker's Corner, Hyde Park. In 1968, the first land-based station, Radio Free London, made its first broadcast at the FRA Trafalgar Square rally in August 1968 with a transmitter built by Mike Bass, who some of you might know, and Peter Murtha, who you will probably know better as Peter Chicago. So they were involved in those early days with land-based radio. And there's a young lady with a Radio Free London sticker. That was just after the Speaker's Corner rally. It started, the one at Speaker's Corner, which was organised by the National Commercial Radio Movement, started at Speaker's Corner, and there you can see Martin Rosen of the NCRM, and one of the banners that would later be carried towards Trafalgar Square, and there's another one. And it doesn't look as if there are that many of us on the march there, from Speaker's Corner to Trafalgar Square, but it was considerably longer than you can see there. What is important to us is that one of the marchers was a group from a station called Radio Free Helen. They were another land-based station. I wanted to get involved in land-based pirate radio. Radio Free London was already on the air, and I had offered my house as a location. A couple of people came down to look at it. Colin King was one of them, and an engineer, and they decided it wasn't really suitable. They couldn't get a good aerial up there, so it didn't get used, which was disappointing for me. But I still wanted to get involved in land-based radio, so I got speaking to the Radio Free Helen people. Now let me tell you a little bit about the Helen network. It was a disaster, to be honest. It was a group of stations, 6 or 7 stations. The plan was to each of them to broadcast for half an hour from a different location in South London. And the idea was that one would follow the other, and that way it wouldn't give sufficient time for the authorities to track any of the stations. In theory, it sounds a good idea. In practice, it was a useless idea. One station might come on with a good signal, the next station, often it didn't come on at all, often you could only just about hear it, so there was no continuity between all the stations. But all the same, we decided that we'd try and come on the air and join the Helen network. I knew nothing about transmitters or running a radio station, so I spoke to my best friend, Roger Allen, who I was at school with, and we recruited another school colleague, Chris Lowe, and we thought, no, let's start up our own radio station. I told my mum. She was supportive. I didn't tell Dad, but Mum was speaking when she went down to see the local butcher. She was speaking to the butcher's boy about starting up a pirate radio station. He liked the idea, and he said, can I join? And he did. His name was Norman Thompson, and he became Eddie Lloyd. And he brought along 2 of his friends, David Squires and Doug Russell. What was important there is Doug Russell had a driving licence, and he had a car. So if we got a transmitter, we could actually start moving around from site to site. While we were working out what to do, I offered Radio Helen the opportunity of broadcasting from my house. It had been turned down by Radio Free London because they couldn't get a good aerial up. But they came down and they said, no problem at all. We can rig an aerial up down your garden. And they came along on a Saturday afternoon, put the aerial up, left the transmitter and a reel-to-reel tape recorder with their half-hour programme in my bedroom, arranging to come back the next day. Overnight I copied the tape. I thought it might be an idea to have a record of what had happened. So Radio Helen broadcast, or Radio Helen 6, it was one of the network, they broadcast successfully the following day, and of course there were no rates. But we were interested in getting our own station, and there's a group of 6 of us in my loft, not wanting to antagonise Dad. I'd sort of boarded over the loft, not very professionally, just any old bits of wood I could find on the floor. So we took some equipment up there and pretended that we were a radio station. Nothing there is anything to do with a transmitter. there's a radio and there's something out of a chassis out of something, and my mate Roger Allen with a pair of headphones on. And there we are again, pretending that's me, second left. And we thought it would be nice if we could get our own transmitter. Roger Allen, he was my best friend, and he ended up, he stuck it out with Radio Jackie on and off right until about 2015, I think. He was a newsreader. So where were we going to get a transmitter? We thought about government surplus. We knew about government surplus shops. So I found a government surplus warehouse in Hertfordshire, a place called Codicot in Hertfordshire, and Doug drove us up there. We all put a fiver in, and we had a look at what they had, but we didn't really know what we were looking for. We didn't know what a transmitter, what a medium wave transmitter looked like. So we ended up buying an a VHF AM transceiver, I think it was, totally useless, no power supply with us, but we were all excited, we got it home, but then nobody knew what to do with it. So there wasn't much chance of us getting anything going out of that, so that was money down the drain. Then I heard a station on the air called Radio Apollo. They were giving out a phone number, and I rang them up and said, look, we want to do what you're doing, we want to start a pirate radio station, would you be prepared to build us a transmitter? And the guy said yes, so we went round and saw him. He gave us a list of components, said you supply all the components, I'll build the transmitter, no charge. He told us where to go. He said there are component shops in Lyle Street, in central London and in Edgware Road. You should be able to get any of the components. So a couple of us went up to Lyle Street on the tube, and we got everything that was needed, and we delivered it back to Roger, and not to his name was Roger as well. And a week later, we had our first transmitter. In the meantime, I built myself a studio, a proper studio. We couldn't have it in the loft, so that's my first studio in early 1969. I'm at the microphone. Valerie Barlow is standing to the right. She was never a member of Jackie, but she did come along and help on a few occasions. And this was the transmitter. I'm sure you're very familiar with that design. I mentioned the 807, which I'm in love with. That's on the right. It's a self-oscillating 807. The circuit diagram is by a guy called Rayner, F.G. Rayner, I think, in Practical Wireless. And it was obviously designed for top band and medium wave, or our end of medium wave where we were going to go is not far from top band, so a few more winds on the coil, and that would do nicely. So that's the transmitter that was built for us. That's slightly a later picture, but that's roughly what it looked like. There's the 807. We mounted a rotary converter on the same chassis. The original transmitter that was built was had a mains supply, but this is a few years later, 73 I think. So we put the rotary converter on the chassis as well, and we replaced the 6L6, the 6J5 by an ECC83, which gave us a bit more gain, so we didn't have to run it out of the speaker output on a cassette. Anyway, so that's the transmitter we ended up with, and that was one of our first broadcasts. It's a bloody miserable day it was at Barrow Hill. There's Norman Thompson, the butcher's boy, and Doug Russell, our driver, and there's the transmitter covered in a piece of plastic as it was tipping down with rain. I think you can just see an umbrella to the right. My mum answered the phone. She took the requests. 6441664. I regretted giving out the home number eventually, and we had to have it changed because people were ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning. But she was very, very supportive of Radio Jackie right through its existence, and I know a number of people here knew my mum. This was our first transmitter. In the early days, we didn't always go into a field. Sometimes we were given sites in houses. Again, as I said, it had a main supply, the program on reel-to-reel tape, and 19-set variometer. It was also that day. It was also the day of our first raid. Now I saw this miserable character, Victor Arthur William Frisbee. He lived at 17 Delacour Road, London SE3. But he's dead now, so don't go around there. Now, see what he's got in his hand, that black thing in his hand. That's what it was. His Nova Pal DF set. They all had one of those. He appeared to be on his own, but he just looked very suspicious, walking up and down the road with a suit on. So, as I said, maybe a miserable bastard he was. So I took some pictures of him. He didn't attempt to stop me. The transmitter was long gone already that day, so we took some pictures, we disappeared, and that was that. Now, our driver, Doug Russell, emigrated to America a few months after we started. It left us without a driver. In the meantime, we wanted to recruit some more staff. We'd left Helen by then. We left Helen after about a month. It wasn't working, so we decided to go our own way on 227. So we took on some new staff. One of them was Howard Smith, also known as Ian West. He was from Radio Helen North. Helen was just fading left, right and centre. Another one was Ian Temple, Mike Hayes. I met him at one of the London rallies and we got talking about pirate radio, so I took his details down, and when we actually got started he was quite keen to join us. And someone else who I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of, Dave Wright, Dave Owen, he came along, he tracked us down to one of the early transmissions and said he'd like to join us. So that's what happened. But Doug Russell had gone, so we didn't have a car. So how were we going to get to the site? We put everything into a pram. The pram arrived in the autumn of 1969. Howard left, Dave Wright centre, and I'm just checking that the tuning's okay. It meant we couldn't travel that far to the sites. It had to be within easy reach of my house. In Temple at the Brickfields in Sutton, for the winter of '69. You can see the crystal sticking out of the front of the transmitter, that little black box. It was a 30-minute walk back to Burley Road from the Brickfields, pushing the baby. As I said, we had to be within fairly easy reach of home. The pram was, of course, good publicity. This cartoon by J. Edward Oliver was in Disc and Music Echo. But we were prepared to travel further afield. So there was no hesitation about taking baby on the underground. Ian Temple lived in Hounslow, so we thought we'd have a location in Hounslow, so we took the transmitter to Hounslow. But we also used it for jamming Radio 1. When North Sea was being jammed, we thought it would be a good idea to jam Radio 1. So we did that from a pram. The aerial was a cane sticking out of the pram with a bit of wire running up the cane, so the range, considering the power of Radio 1, was yards. But if anyone heard it, they might have got a nasty whistle on top of Radio 1, but it was good publicity. The Great Pram Jam, the paper called it. Now, we lost our pram quite early on, so we got another pram. It wasn't as good. It was a pram chassis with a piece of wood. But it still did the trick. And there's Roger Allen, he's the one on the left in the natty uniform, and Howard Smith with the new pram. That was taken by a local paper. It shows the Radio Jackie crew. You can see the 807 there standing proudly with its top cap. Dave Owen, Ian Temple, me and Howard Smith. Now, we got raided with the new pram as well. That was most unfortunate. This is Rosehill Park in Sutton, and they just drove straight across the park, no police there. They drove straight across the park. We disappeared over the fence into someone's back garden, and of course they got all the transmitter, which was off to the left actually, but they used the pram to get everything to their car. It was led by one Stanley William Smith, who was head of the Post Office Radio Interference Department at that time. He was an assistant executive engineer. Gotts was only a technical officer. So Smith was Gotts's boss, but he was just as miserable as Gotts was. We went to try and claim a transmitter back one day, so we went to his office, which was at Bunhill Row in London. He was on the 11th floor. Smith's boss was A.W. Hayward. You can see his name there, I've arrowed it. So we thought, we'll go and speak to him, so we want our stuff back. We didn't get very far in the door, they wouldn't speak to us. But, I'm going to admit a bit of theft here, I did nick the H from his name. So, by the time, well, that's actually before we went in, so he became Mr. A.W. Hayward. But they wouldn't greet us. So on that particular raid, having loaded up their car, they drove back across Rosehill Park towards us, but this time they didn't take the pram. So we were able to keep that. But this was the last time we were going to need the pram, because this man came along. It was never used again. It was the start of a new era with the arrival of Brian Malcolm Horne. He bought us a generator. He was happy to drive us anywhere, but that's all another story. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Now, you did mention that you loved 807 valves. You told me you don't have an 807 valve yourself.
I've got an 813, which is on a bookshelf as an ornament. When I cleared my parents' house, we just threw everything away. What am I going to want an 807 for? I'm not going to be broadcasting again. Obviously, I did broadcast again. I came on Radio Jackie when it got its license, or when we got Thames Radio's license. But I've never been interested in building equipment anymore. So no, I don't have an 807 valve. I was going to buy one, and I had a look at the prices on eBay, and they're not cheap.
Well, if you'll pardon the pun, we're about to rectify that. The engineer's got that one.
You're going to give me a rectifier?
We're going to give you one for your mantelpiece.
Oh.
Because for lifetime services to Pirate Radio, we're very proud to award you the first Golden 807 Award.
Happy to accept it on behalf of Radio Jackie and on behalf of Land-Based Radio. I don't think I really did that much, but I accept that we were a pioneer. We did get the movement going, and a lot of good things came from Radio Jackie. Obviously, we did get a licence in the end, but only when Thames Radio failed and we bought them for £1. The licence has been renewed several times since then, and you can still... the important thing is that we were always campaigning for a licence for South West London, and that is where our licence is for, South West London. And as someone mentioned earlier, there are only 2 small commercial stations, independent ones, us and one up in the Scottish Islands. Bowring Global have gobbled up everyone else, but Tony wouldn't sell, and thank goodness for that. Radio Jackie is still on, and I'm very proud of it.
Nick, has anyone else been to jail for this cause? I think you must be the only one.
I think people have been to jail for other things to do with radio, just criminal things that went on at sites. But I haven't heard of anyone who actually went to jail for broadcasting. Gotts said in court, and he is the man who's responsible, he said, I recognised Catford's voice. We knew him well. We knew it. I wasn't there. I was, on this occasion, it was a broadcast from Reigate Hill, and it was had a UHF link to a house in Merstham. And I was on the air when it went off. I made the mistake of going up there and confronting them. And in court, Gotts said, we recognised his voice. And in my mind, that shouldn't have been sufficient evidence to get a conviction. Myself and Tony Collis were prosecuted. Tony got off with a conditional discharge. I got 28 days in Pentonville.
And the judge said?
The chairman of the bench, Lady Dorothy Auckland, make note of the name, she must be dead now, she was old. But she said, because I've got previous convictions, there wasn't any point in giving me a discharge or any other kind of probation or anything like that. So she said, what you need is a short, sharp shock. And that's what that's exactly what I thought.
Has anyone got any questions?
I think we've got time to take a couple of questions.
Yeah. Can I just say, Mark, after that we're going to do a group photograph which we'd like Nick to be at the front of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any questions for Nick?
Was your sentence suspended? Was any of it suspended?
No, that was the previous one. I'd already had the suspended sentence. The good thing was that I didn't reduce my involvement with Radio Jackie after that, but I didn't have to stand by the transmitter anymore. So I could still do the programmes, and I was just a lookout in the car.
Now, I remember when we got busted, Andy, the first time I met Nick was when he came to our court case in ABC. You enjoyed going to the court cases?
I loved going to court cases. It was always a good opportunity to take photographs of the post office. And there was still the post office in those days. They later went on to be the Home Office and DTI. But it's in my days, it was always the post office from the Radio Interference Department. Later on, Jim Crow got the job of head of the department, much nicer man than Gotts or Smith. He was in the phone book, so we got his phone number straight away. You could ring him up and say, Jimmy, are you coming out tomorrow? And he'd say, normally Brian would ring, and he'd say, no, Brian, you're all right tomorrow. And when Brian, who ran the London transmitter of independent radio, when that closed down, he rang Jim and said, look, we're closing down tomorrow. Can I ask you to let us get away with that transmission? And Jim said, yeah, no problem. And he did. He went up to the site, but he just parked in the pub car park nearby, just sat it out, and then went home. So a much fairer man. I'm sure all the nasty people have now gone. Copsey, who some people may have come across, Brian Copsey, he was a better one. He came to Radio Jackie's 40th anniversary celebration. We invited him, and he was happy to accept the invitation, came along, so I spent a lot of time speaking to him. And he said he eventually left the department because he couldn't work with Gotts any longer. And he said most other people felt the same way about him. He was just, he was too dedicated to his job, and violence didn't worry him at all.
As I said this morning, he said, you got the licence eventually, but no thanks to the authorities or the establishment who do not recognise our disruptors, our pioneers. They think they're naughty boys. So you, Ronan O'Reilly, and yourself, Nick, I think are in the same league. Finally, they got licences. Finally, Caroline got a licence. Radio Jackie got a licence, but you had to buy your licence.
We did. It was only £1.
Churlish decision.
We had to take on their debts as well, or Tony did. Because prior to going 24/7, the committee that ran Radio Jackie voted to give Tony total control, and that was without any doubt the best move.
It's been organised, yeah.
And it's still his station.
Yeah.
And
But you must feel vindicated in that what you set out to do, you've achieved, and you've left a legacy that's still there.
oh, very, very much so. Yeah, I'm proud of what I helped to achieve. We wouldn't have got where we are today without Tony, but I like to think I did my little bit.
Yes. Nick Catford, thank you very much.